Good afternoon. My name is Mujahid. As Monique mentioned, I'm from Sudan. Uh, I work with refugees. I've been working with refugees for about 10 years at the moment, and I've been a comedian for about 9 years. People often ask me why I have such a diverse mix of life. Um, I don't know, I enjoy both sides of my life. I think my refugee job keeps me quite grounded, and, the comedy allows me to challenge and channel some of my energy. And as my mom keeps reminding me, billionaire, playboy, philanthropist was taken. Sometimes when I forget that, my mom on the phone, she goes, "You are my son and I love you, but you are not George Clooney." As mentioned earlier, I'm from Sudan, and I've lived in Australia now for about 13 years. Sudan was once the largest country in Africa. The equator cuts the land in half. And for a lot of us, that's almost a prophecy. Maybe the line in the middle of the country meant that we're going to be forever divided and fighting. Sudan is in the Guinness Book of Records for having the longest civil war in history, 55 years, with only one ceasefire of 11 years. It was during the World Cup. Generally, it's most people who come from Sudan, they can tell you about how it's a police state where freedom of expression is highly, highly disliked and discouraged. A place where humor becomes one's only defense mechanism, and people utilize that to their advantage. And I think sometimes it's a bit bleak and dark, but sometimes that's all what we have. I remember growing up as a child and being quite depressed. As you do as a child, you go and you talk to your parents about it. So I went and talked to my dad. I said to him, "Dad, I think I'm really depressed." And African man, very pragmatic, life is hard. He held me really close and he goes, "Mujahid, you can't possibly be depressed. You go to school, you have a house, and you have 3 meals a day. I have to work 2 jobs and have 4 ugly children. Now go on and put something nice on. I think Madonna wants to adopt you." On a more serious side, I'm here to talk to you about how humor can be eventually a mechanism for change. The key topic I'm talking about today generally is about refugees. Firstly, I'd like to start with the definition, just because through stereotypes and media, definitions get jumbled up. So a refugee is someone who is outside their country of origin and cannot return for fear of persecution due to social, political, or religious opinion. That is a United Nations created criteria that people need to fit into before they're classified as refugees. Asylum seekers are people who are still waiting for their refugee status to be proven. There are currently 15.4 million refugees in the world today, and another 15 that are actually in danger of becoming refugees in the next 5 years, which takes the total world refugee population to about 30 million, so as nearly as many people in this country. People often ask about the stories you have, and it's all about finding beauty in whatever sad situation you have. As a refugee and as working with refugees, sometimes you hear a lot of stories, and some of them stick with you, and some of them you forget, and some of them you'd like to forget. But I think that the aspects of the refugee experience that are seldom discussed involve the huge emotional cost and loss which involves becoming a refugee. The refugee process has 3 phases. The first phase is you have to be living in your country in a situation of widespread violence and upheaval. Police cannot guarantee your protection, and quite often they have things like random arrests, forcible conscription. After that, you have to flee from your country of origin to a second country of asylum, where you often have to wait your turn in a refugee camp, after which you are transported to a country of third asylum where you are resettled. The average waiting time in a refugee camp is 10 years. And if every refugee in the world today waits their turn until they are processed in turn, the average waiting time is 99.4 years. People always ask me as a refugee, "Do you feel lucky?" I'm like, "Of course I feel lucky. I'm on this side of the dirt. It's always a blessing." But it's very difficult to feel lucky and fortunate when you have family still living where you live, when you see other asylum seekers from other parts of the world that you consider brothers and sisters languishing in prison for a crime they did not commit. Seeking asylum has and never will be a crime. The average in Australia, for example, compared to the rest of the world, the average detention time in Canada is about 24 days. The average detention time in Australia is about 235 days. I want to tell you the story of a good colleague of mine. Her name was Susan, and she was from Iraq. And she was in love with another woman in Iraq, and they kept their relationship secret. And then the war broke out in Iraq. Her partner was granted a visa to go to Syria as a country of second asylum. Those two women were quite inseparable, and it was a very difficult thing for them to see to be apart. And I think it kind of embodies the refugee experience. Little things like the PhD you spent 6 years on, the wedding that was planned for the week later, the birth that's due any minute. All of that shifts. If I told everyone in this room today that when they get home, they're not going to be able to access their property for a week, our lives would turn upside down. Imagine if they told us, you get $1 million and you go to New Zealand, but you don't get to pack. 95% of people in the room will disagree and refuse to go. But back to Linda's story. So Linda recounts that she was on top of her roof of her house. The sky was acrid dark. Rockets were flying in from ships from across the ocean. The rain tasted like gunpowder. And she stood on her roof of her apartment and wept and wept and wept. And through the midst of the madness, a small taxi pulled out. And Linda states, I saw these two pair of pink shoes, and I could recognize them anywhere. Susan had given up her visa to go to Syria to come back to be with Linda. Linda stated that she ran down the stairs, one foot with no shoe, and these two women ran and embraced in the rain, burqa to burqa, with flares lighting up the sky, with rain pouring down. Sadly, Susan passed away a week later in a car bomb in Iraq. Brings me to one of the key points of my speech. Humor is the ultimate conversation starter. Don't worry, I'll bring it back. Humor is the ultimate conversation starter. Wherever I've been in the world, people use humor to get through difficult times. It's used to make fun of current situations, and no matter what happens to you, eventually it becomes the funniest. One of the policies of Sudan was to conscript soldiers who are under the age of 16 as a result of the civil war that required more infantry. And I was one of those boys. In 2001, after being in Australia for 1 year, I was arrested in Sudan and forced to join the army. And I remember, till this very day, my life was kind of flashing before my eyes, and the weirdest thoughts go through your head. And I remember thinking to myself, oh my God, this can't be happening. I still have overdue DVDs in Australia. The gods must be crazy, 1 and 2. But that humor helped me get through what I'm getting through. And wherever I've traveled, people will always use humor as a key way of dealing with things. When I was working with people in detention centers here in Australia, I asked one of them, how is it? And he goes, it's okay. It's like a mini United Nations. I'm like, how's that going for you? Oh, next week we're going to veto the Friday night quiche. But it becomes a matter of finding a situation and trying to use humor as a way of opening the dialogue. And rather than it being a debate about whose truth is more right, it becomes just a general conversation. And sometimes you can channel that energy into positivity. I have a Middle Eastern friend called Rami, and who gets randomly searched every time he goes near an airport. I mean, he says it's because of his Middle Eastern appearance, and frankly, we don't really know what that means. I mean, I think a plate of tabbouleh is of Middle Eastern appearance. So my friend Omar decides to fly, and the lady, the air hostess, shows him to his seat and goes, this way, Mr. Omar, and the gentleman next to him starts to make all these comments about terrorism. And Omar says to me, I was so angry, I was filled with rage, and I didn't know how to channel it. I felt that if I verbally or physically abused him, then I'll just be perpetuating the stereotype. So I decided that the only thing I can do is make a joke about it. So halfway through the flight, I picked up my airplane phone and I said in a loud whisper, hello, Ahmed. This is Omar in seat B6. I am in position. Are you ready? Yalla, death to America. And that's why Omar can't fly Qantas anymore. It's wherever I go. I have a Nigerian friend called Kingsley. You might have received an email from him. But it becomes a joke. Wherever he meets someone, hello, I am Kingsley, but you can call me Prince Charming 99 at hotmail.com. I'd like your name, date of birth, and phone number and bank account details. But it's, again, a way of challenging that. I want to finish with a joke from Sudan, which I think has a lot of powerful context to it. It says there was once a man who was walking down the street, and he saw a sign that said, eat dinner as much as you like, and your son pays the bill in 25 years. So he walked in, and he ate, and he ate, and he had a great time. And then the waiter comes in and gives him a bill, and he goes, what's this? He goes, this is your bill, sir. He goes, didn't you say that your son pays for these meals? He goes, yeah, but sir, this is your father's bill from 25 years ago. In essence, that joke to me is about what we do today, our next generations, our children will pay for. So if we teach them that compassion and strength don't go hand in hand, they'll associate it with weakness. And by the normal process of evolution, it's going to come out and be phased out of the system. The ability, compassion, stands for the pain we feel when we see other people suffering. So there's no way around it, unfortunately. For us to actually care, people must continue to suffer. But at the end of it, radical change is only possible when a nation of informed citizens with their own collective conclusions decide to move. And that's how he started. And I think the best way to start it is with a joke. Thank you very much. Have a good evening.